Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Garden Glow Up podcast. Today, my guest is Emmanuel, and it is about to be fall. So, we are filming at the very beginning of August, and it's about to be fall, which means that it's about to be vegetable gardening season for South Florida. So, I invited Emmanuel, who is gardening in zone 10B. I'm in zone 11, so that we could talk about what it's like preparing for a fall vegetable garden and help you all get ready for what's about to happen. So, Emmanuel, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast. This is a great opportunity.
Of course, no problem. And thank you for being here. Okay, so when I think about the first thing I do, so let me tell you a little bit about how I garden, and then you can tell us a little bit about yourself. So we're in South Florida, both of us. And
Mhm.
so gardening in South Florida is a little bit different than gardening everywhere else. I would say it's probably the same, just in tropical areas as to what we're about to discuss. But our season starts now in the fall when temperatures start to cool, lasts through winter and spring, and then you kind of turn it off in the summer. So maybe we'll start with a really controversial topic. Do you garden in the summer?
So that is a very controversial topic because
Yeah.
in different areas, depending on where your temperature and your climate looks like. Here in South Florida, I always tell gardeners that our prime growing season is in the fall, not in the summer. Usually in the summer, we can't grow anything because of our extreme climate, our extreme temperatures, our humidity levels are off the roof. And so we can't really grow anything without having stress behind it and constant disease and pest. So I always tell gardeners in South Florida or in Florida in general that our growing season is in fall. That summer, there's no way you could grow something because it's going to just suffer throughout the entire growing season unless it's like a Florida native. That's
Yeah.
why I feel like I kind of, instead of doing like your basic vegetable gardening, which I do love doing and I still do here and there, and I'm getting ready to do it as well. I kind of moved into permaculture, which is more favorable for us Floridians since we're growing all year round, not specifically in the fall or in the summer only. If not, we are able to harvest throughout the entire year. So, but in generally speaking, I would say fall.
Agreed. I will let the listeners know I stay out of the garden over the summer just because I can't handle the heat. Like
Mhm.
I don't even if you told me it was a great growing season in Florida, which it's not, but even if you like swore to me it was, be like I just can't handle that type of heat. So I've learned to stay out of the garden in the summer. I have everything nice and manicured by the end of spring so that it's set up to deal with the summer. And then I kind of just walk away and say, whatever happens, happens, and I'll deal with it in the fall. So
Yeah.
the heat's just too much. But I would, okay, so after doing a few seasons of vegetable gardening, I would say that to me, the first thing I do is you kind of have to look at what went well and what went badly last season and pick your seeds from there. And if you're really well prepared, you thought about that maybe at the beginning of the year because that's when the seeds are available. It's not that that's the best time for us, but because I think we're not typical in terms of our gardening season, the seeds aren't available at the times we need them. So if you're like uber well prepared, you probably started thinking about this season in like
Yeah.
January.
Yeah, definitely. Something that I realized that in any big box stores here in Southern Florida, in general, all
Mhm.
these big box stores will follow the seasons. No matter where you are, they're going to follow the seasons based off of how it's generally seen. So,
Mhm.
our stores here in South Florida, they're going to go off of based off of everybody else, especially since in other zones at 8 and below, they start their growing season in spring and it carries on to summer. And that's where in the beginning of the year, you'll see the seeds come out in the beginning of the year because everybody else is doing it. However, here in Florida, we need our seeds available by fall. And so that's definitely something I agree with that you have to have preparation in order to plan for the fall because once fall comes, the seeds are going to be nowhere to be found. That's when you'll probably see your spring coming bulbs or your fall coming bulbs. That's what probably you'll see in Lowe's or in Home Depot whenever you go out. But in generally speaking, I don't know what gardener does not have a huge stack of leftover seeds from the past
Yeah.
following years, so you're already prepared.
Yep. Okay, and then when it comes to seed selection, what do you look for when you're preparing for your fall vegetable garden?
For my vegetable garden, so I kind of, when it comes to preparing myself for seed starting, generally I go off of one, I get seeds that I know that I'll be using constantly. For example, like your green beans, your leafy greens, your radishes. Those are things that I like to knock out the park first because those are vegetables I know I will be harvesting out the garden constantly.
Mhm.
Number two is if I would like to experiment, I would only experiment with one or two because, like, I don't like to use the entire garden up for just pure experimenting. I only dedicate a little spot to, oh, a weird tomato variety, let me try that, or a weird vegetable I haven't tried, let me try that. So that's kind of what my plan is when it comes to seed starting. And another thing is I always go after reliable companies that I know of. For example, like Burpee, Territorial Seed Company, Baker Creek, those are common seed companies that I have used in the past that I found that their seeds are more of a better quality and they come in bigger quantity as well. I know there is like your cheap seed selection and like the Dollar Tree or something like that. Although they do their thing, however, it's not like the most recommended if you want to have a larger scale at the end of the year.
That's good advice. I've never really thought of it. I don't know why, but when I see them in the dollar store, I'm just like, I don't it nothing in me thinks that like, oh, they were thinking of South Florida when they created
Mhm.
these, you know? So like I'm not gonna say I've ever tried them. If somebody's tried them and they work, that's fantastic. But I've always just steered clear. So I'm on board with everything you said. I also think there's a lot to be said for when you're choosing varieties, choosing Asian varieties, because I think the varieties in Asia are far more acclimated to, like they're created with our kind of climates in mind. So I think that if you're choosing eggplants, you know, to look for one with an Asian background, that's also something that you could be doing when choosing seeds to really make sure that you are setting yourself up for success and getting something that is made for tropical climates. If you were to get something that is made with like that comes from Europe. So like eggplants come from a lot of different places. And if you get like the traditional European eggplant, it's not going to do as well in South Florida as if you had gone as like in contrast to what an Asian variety would do. It's going to do really well in South Florida. And ultimately you're going to be a lot more successful of a gardener, even though it may not look like what you would have gotten in the supermarket, which I think a lot of people think of those things as like,
Mhm.
oh, that's what I want, you know? I have that conversation with people a lot of times about herbs. I don't know about you. They're like, oh, yeah, this is the type of basil. And I'm like, you should be growing Thai basil. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, but I want the Italian basil. I'm like, okay, you know, and like, oh, they need heat. So I'm going to grow it in summer. And you're like, start it in fall. They're like, no, no, they say they need heat. I'm going to start it in summer. Like, okay. You know, so, so,
I definitely agree with that. You can't really, the garden, something I realized that a lot of gardeners get discouraged is when they compare their fruits or their harvest with what the grocery store has. Definitely don't compare because you will never ever have what the grocery has unless you are the farmer producing it for the grocery store. And something that to keep in mind is that you're organically growing them. There's nothing messed with the plant. There's no GMOs mixed in. There's no hormones mixed with it to make the product bigger. There's nothing mixed into it. So most likely your proportions will be at a smaller size, but not, needless to say, you can still have great quantity and stuff like that. You just can't compare yourself in general of an organic garden to what is in the grocery store because like a huge deception is like your bell peppers, these huge things, but yet when you organically grow them, they're like this big.
yeah,
You can't compare them to the store because although you're growing them organic, they're not going to get as the size as the vegetable store. So you can't say, "Oh, I sucked at it because my vegetable came out this big," but in the grocery
right.
store it's double or triple the size. You can't really compare yourself to that.
Absolutely. Okay. So moving on from selecting seeds, how do you, and we'll come back to the seeds in a little while, but how do you go about preparing your space for your fall vegetable garden?
Yeah, so when it comes to preparing the space, I take multiple things into consideration. One, what's the sun exposure looking like? How much water is it receiving? What's the soil in the ground looking like? Because I prefer to grow my vegetables in the ground. However, I know some gardeners do it in the vegetable garden or in raised beds, which I'll discuss in a little bit. Those are the three main factors that I tend to look at when it comes to planting my vegetables in the area. One, if I know that that area had prior disease to it, then I'll make sure that I'll be treating the area or any given that space. I'll treat it for whatever it had, whether it be removing the first layer of soil and then adding a new one, amending it, removing any debris like big rocks to make sure that the
Right.
vegetables grow perfectly fine, making sure that the shaded plants go in the shaded area and stuff like that. That's a huge thing. Now, for vegetable gardens or raised bed gardens, like I have right now, the Birdies gardens from Epic Gardening.
Mhm.
Something that I do with them is that making sure that I don't, because a huge thing is that many people want to fill up the entire bed with soil. And that's just a whole bunch of money you're pouring into there for no absolute reason. So, what I would recommend is if you have a raised bed that you're getting ready to plant up for your vegetables, is to fill up the bottom with a little bit of composting material like branches, leaves, newspaper, anything that you can fill up a good, like a third portion of that raised bed. Go for it, and then the rest you can fill it up with a bit of soil and compost material, so you don't waste a whole bunch of money into that. Making sure that your raised beds have well draining soil, aerated soil. It has a bit of a biostarter fertilizer mixed into it, so your veggies can get a little bit of nutrition value when they start growing. Those are the main things I would definitely recommend when it comes to preparing your area for your vegetable garden season, as well as if you're needing any type of support system, trellis, or anything like that, making sure that it's installed before it's too late in the season when your plants are already too big.
Okay, so you mentioned something that I thought was interesting that I'd like to dig into a little bit more. You mentioned that you like, are you doing no dig gardening in your space?
For me in my space, not really. I kind of
Okay.
just do like a classic go for it, plant it, whatever. I know there is multiple different ways on how you could come up or approach fixing your garden, whether it be like the no-till, like you
Mhm.
mentioned. There's so many different methods out there that you could go after. Me, I kind of just stay more on the basic side of things. I kind of make sure that my area is removed of any debris or anything like that, making sure that the soil is amended with any type of extra or additional nutrition that it may need, as well as any supplemental water that it may need. I kind of just go after I know what the vegetable needs to grow properly
Okay.
uh, in that spectrum.
How do you, so one of the things you said that I think is interesting is removing debris, because one of the things that I find in my garden is that it's so rocky. If I
Mhm.
set out to try and like remove the rocks, I don't know how I would go about that. I do happen to have raised beds,
Mhm.
and the reason I had them built, I just built mine with wood, but the reason I did it is because I had two large dogs that I was like, if
Mhm.
I just start gardening, um they weren't going to respect that area. Like, I just know, I knew my dogs at the time well enough to be like, they're going to go roll around in this, and short of like building like a fence. So at that time I was like, raised beds just work. And so my dogs have since passed, but since I have them, I just keep going with the raised beds, which works for me. But I can't imagine. So at that time, that's why I made that decision. So if you, I think for anybody listening, if you have big dogs or even little dogs that like to root around, just consider how you're going to keep them away. But if I did decide to like switch to doing it in the ground, I have so many rocks. Like, I think I would still ultimately have to have, which I have seen with no dig. You can still do a structure and then fill it with compost and then kind of let it blend in to the ground beneath it, and it becomes kind of what you're talking about. But because you're accustomed to South Florida, I really want to talk about, like, have you seen like these really sandy, rocky backyards? And if so, what would you recommend for those?
Yeah, so my backyard is a sandy, rocky
Okay.
backyard in
Yeah.
general. And that
Okay.
is a struggle that one does deal with. However, like I say, it's totally depending on how the gardener or how much time the gardener wants to put into the garden. So if you're a gardener that doesn't have that much time on your hands, you kind of just want to get going, but you don't want to spend so much time, then it's best to just go with raised beds, because then it's just installing them, filling them up with soil, and then you're planting, and then you're good for your growing season. You don't require that much work. But if you're a gardener that does have time in the hands and you do want to evolve your garden over time, something that I recommend that I found useful is one, when it comes to planting. So my garden is a food forest right now. There's not really any huge specific area I grow for veggies. I only use raised beds in this given circumstance. In the past, I did grow in the ground. But what I would do in my given circumstances is I would go ahead and till up at least the first layer of soil that I could at least reach to. And whatever big rocks I know that could probably disturb my vegetables, I would remove. So I was and usually in summer break is usually when I would do most of this stuff, preparing it for the fall, or when in fall, whenever I'm in break, I would definitely do it. Is I would go through, dedicate a few hours to just taking out the rocks, amending the soil with new soil so it could decrease the level of sand in the soil. Although sand is not 100% that bad in our given circumstance, it's better to have a little bit more soil than sand in our area.
Yeah.
But that's mainly for if you want to do basic vegetables. But in food forestry, it's not such a huge thing. It's only you remove the rocks if it's in the way of you planting your tree, and then over time you'll see that your soil evolves. That's what I
Okay.
really figured out. Because when it comes to my garden, in the beginning, it was just gray. All
Yeah.
you'll see is gray. Comes a
Yeah.
huge rain or comes a huge thunderstorm. What floats to the top? Sand. Your garden will look gray by the end of the day. And so what happens is with food forestry, you kind of evolve that by when it comes to natural decomposition of the plants, you putting wood chips down, it
Mm-hmm.
naturally composes and starts mixing with the soil. And then you'll see that your soil over the few years, within probably 2 or the first 2, you'll see a huge difference of how your soil becomes gray to a more darker in color over the years. For example, my farm over there in Parkland, we've been growing there for almost 3 years now, and the soil is a deep brown, rich color now. It's evolved over the years, and now my backyard is now turning to that brown, rich color. So it's totally depending on how much time you have on your hands. If you really want to go ahead and dedicate yourself into the garden, then definitely go for it. Remove all the rocks you see that can mess up your vegetable production and amend it. But if you don't have that much time in your hands and you're a busy person, go for raised beds since it's the most easiest and less time consuming.
That's really great. I've when it so in my garden, it's separated into like the pretty things are in the ground and the vegetables are in raised beds. So because the pretty things are in the ground, or what I would call like ornamental gardens,
Mhm.
since you kind of just let them do their thing, like you plant it up, it looks nice, and you kind of let them do their things. Like you manicure it, but other than that, you just kind of leave them alone. I've never really dug into the soil to see how it's changed. So
Mhm.
that's really interesting that that's what you've seen happen. And if I ever start a food forest, that'll be good.
Yeah, it's definitely, and also food forestry is if you don't have time in your hands, if you want an all year round productive garden that you could just go out there and harvest, whether it be cherries, the bananas, uh,
Mm-hmm.
root crops, doesn't matter what it is, you plant a food forest and leave it alone. That's the whole point of a food forest. That's why I kind of got into it, because my schedule is tight. And so that's why I decided, I was like, I love vegetable garden. I'll be doing
Right.
it in the fall with the Epic Gardening raised beds that they sent out for me to use. Awesome possum, I'll use them. But for when it comes to large scale vegetable gardening that I used to do, I don't have the time for it no more.
That's awesome. Okay, good to know. One of the things we've mentioned a few times that I want to make sure listeners understand is that uh, I think every single year you are going to have to touch up your beds with a little bit of compost, with a little bit of soil, whatever it is that you're using, your growing medium, you're going to have to touch up your beds every single year. So, for instance, that to me is one of the very first chores that I'm going to have this fall is to start refilling my raised beds. So if you're a new gardener and you're like, I spent all this money on soil and where did it go? We're all going through it. And it's something that you're going to have to do every single year. It was shocking to me when I did it. You know, like you think you're going to buy the soil one time, you fill up the beds, and it's always going to be there and it's always going to be perfect. Emmanuel gave some really good advice into I do think you can do it like over the summer. You can fill it up with a little bit of material that's going to decompose, put the soil on top of that, and just like let it do its thing, and that'll be good for your veggies, and it'll be good for your wallet in the sense that you've minimized the amount of soil you need to buy. So that's one way of bulking it up, but it is a normal thing that every single year you're going to have to touch up your soil. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so how about we move into seed starting? Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you start seeds?
So, to be completely honest, seed starting is not my biggest area of like,
Okay.
oh my God, whatever seed I plant will thrive in my garden. No. So,
Okay.
what I tend to go for is easier seeds that I know will have more probability of success than if I were like to be like, okay, I'm going to plant this like petunia seed and try. No, I'm not
Yeah.
that type of person. I
Okay.
kind of want a easy to grow vegetable that I know will grow very well over the time. However, I'm a huge brassica person, and if everybody knows, brassicas can be a little bit of a pain in the butt when it comes to Florida gardening. Although I haven't had so much issues with them thus far, thank God. But I know many people have had issues with brassicas. So some of the tips I would recommend when it comes to seed starting here in Florida is one, to make sure you go and you buy good seed starting mix. The seed starting mix requires aeration and well drainage. That's the main two key points you want to look for seed starting, because you don't want no bulky soil, because then it could block a seed from growing or sprouting. You don't want anything that retains too much moisture, because then your seeds could damp off. It's something that you have to keep in consideration when it comes to buying a material, is to buy well draining aerated soil for your seeds. Usually what I would recommend is to not have anything with a fertilizer mixed into it, because the roots of seedlings
Mm-hmm.
are very tender, and if they're introduced to a strong fertilizer, it could burn them out. So you could definitely do a diluted liquid fertilizer down the road, only down the road, because if you fertilize them too early, then it could shock them and you can end up killing your seedlings because how powerful a fertilizer can be. But at the end of the day, when it comes to what you use as a seed starting tray, there is specific made seed starting trays, but everybody to their own. I've seen some people use red plastic cups. I've seen people reuse plastic cups that or plastic pots that they've gotten from like seasonal annuals. It's totally depending on to how many people tend to start their own seeds. Me personally, I use the Epic Gardening seed starting trays. They're very durable. They come in great quantity, and they come with a bottom tray that collects water just in case they need to just in case they need to suck up a little bit of water when they're a little bit too dried out. But that's definitely something to look after when it comes to seed starting. And I know something that I see all over the internet is acclimation to the seed starting. Like you start them indoors and then you gradually put them outdoors. That's something I never do. I don't waste my
Yeah.
time doing that. I kind of just start them outdoors. I'm like, if you guys are gonna grow and
Yeah.
thrive, I'm gonna figure it out in these conditions at an early stage. You guys are not gonna get
Yeah.
babied. I'm not gonna start you guys indoors. I'm not gonna start you guys in the shade and then hour by hour. No. If you're gonna do well in my garden, you're gonna have to thrive in the conditions from the beginning. So that's definitely something that I see a lot of gardeners do. I know for gardeners who live in like zones 8 and below that do experience a
Right.
winter, they have to do it, because if they want a
Right.
earlier harvest, they start in the indoors and then they acclimate it to outdoors. But here in South Florida, we don't need to do that, because we have such an elongated growing season that we're able to just plop them in the ground and grow them. Now,
Mm-hmm.
for direct sowing, it's a different thing, because I know I like to direct sow my leafy greens, my corn, my any type of beans, that I start by direct sowing them, because I know that those will not give me an issue. However,
Right.
brassicas, on the other hand, I know those are a bit more delicate, so you can't just plant them in the ground and then they'll thrive. It's something more of, you have to start them in a pot, and then until they are a more favorable size, then you plant them out in the ground. And that's when you can do your more harsh fertilizing. Once again, I always go by organic compost or earthworm castings, since those are the best solutions when it comes to growing your own food. But if use whatever you have on hand and has the best experience with.
Absolutely. I will say that I do go through so I almost everything you said I do. I do go through the process of so my garden is south facing. So we do get a lot of sun. So I do go through the process of starting them in the shade and then
Mhm.
moving them out. Um just because I've seen so many of them fry. And I will say this though, I am like a home gardener, so I am not out there every single day doing what they need. Like sometimes I forget. Like so if it's a hot day and you forget, the seedlings fry. So
Mhm.
I will say that I do start them in the shade just to give them like some leniency, give myself some leniency, and then I move them out little by little. But we're just talking about the length of a patio. Like they're still pretty exposed. So um if you're forgetful like me, consider the shade.
Yep.
I think Emmanuel's out there every single day, but I'm not.
With me, it's been more tight of a schedule. I haven't
Yeah.
been out there, although I do go out to see how the garden's growing. Like I see all the fruits, the bananas, the
Yeah.
papayas, and everything in season right now for food forestry. I'm not there all 100% of the time because I still have my business I'm running in
Yep.
Parkland. I still have I like to go with my neighbor and we do her gardening a little bit and a little bit, and like once a blue moon in the mornings or in the afternoons. I'm getting ready to go back to school next week, so it's an entire tight schedule that I have to work around. So now I'm gonna get ready to be in the garden less over
Yeah.
time.
Absolutely. Okay, so when it comes time, I heard you saying that starting from seeds isn't necessarily what you like to do. Is there another way that you like to start your vegetable garden?
So to be honest with you, I'm not a huge patient person. So
Mhm.
if I go to a local nursery that I love and I see that they have already started vegetables at a
Perfect.
good price, that's where I'm heading.
Okay.
That's usually where I get my supply from. If it's like your beans or stuff like that, then I always start them by seed, no doubt about it. But usually, if I see that there's like a 6 pack of a brassica for like $5, then I'm gonna go
Yeah.
for it because I know that it's worth it at the end of the day. But I'm trying to get rid of that. So instead of spending my money on that, I'm trying to do more seed starting this upcoming
For
year.
sure.
Because I have the seeds. I do have the seeds. I get
Yeah.
lots of samples throughout the year and I don't use them. So I need to use them and use what I have in the garden when it comes time, especially since now this is usually the time where we're preparing to start our seeds. To have something by September or October,
Yeah.
that's usually the time where we have our biggest seed starting fiasco here in Florida.
Mhm.
Like right now, in my raised beds, which you'll see in my raised beds right now, would it be like turmeric? My blue
Mhm.
turmeric is growing right now, and once that's removed, then I have to retouch up the soil, like you mentioned. The other bed is a little bit more ghosted. It has some struggling strawberries in it right now. I mean, it's in the shade, but it's
Yeah.
struggling.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how that's gonna go about. But yeah, definitely.
So I did bring mine in over the summer because I was like, I really didn't want them to just die off. But I was like, but they're not going to survive the summer. Like, I was so scared for them. So I did bring them in and they haven't really survived inside either. So, so I guess I'll just start, like, I am going to start them over now in the summer, but I'll be starting from seed. Okay,
Mhm.
so tell us when you're ready to start vegetable garden, I guess just what does that season look like for you? So what does fall look like for you in terms of timing and getting things started and either in the ground or in the raised beds? What does that look like?
Yeah, so definitely. So my starting point is usually when I see that our temperatures regulate anywhere between the 70s, because that's usually where more of our favorable temperatures and climate tends to come around. Anything in the high 90s, anything in the high 80s, it's a bit more risky. But anything in the 70s, that's usually my sign to start going with the seed starting. Usually I see that around or in what August.
We're in August, yeah.
Usually I see that in the endings of August, beginning of October, around there. That's usually when I see that. That's when I usually go out and I start my mass seed starting. And then going down into what is like your September, November, that's when you want to kind of make sure that your garden's more maintained, more cared for, because that's usually the stage in which your plants could get attacked more when they're more at the younger stages, not on the more mature stages. So you want to make sure you're on a constant watering schedule, a constant feeding schedule. And then usually when it comes into December, January, that's when you're harvesting all of your fruits. If they're short term, then probably you'll harvest them more earlier. But usually that's my time frame. By March is when everything should start wrapping up. The hotter temperatures are rolling in, and that's when you kind of let the garden rest for.
Absolutely. I will say that last year, one of the mistakes I made was I wanted to do a series, like a YouTube series, where I was starting something like every week. And
Mhm.
so one of the mistakes I made was, while that made so much sense in my mind because I wanted to like show people something new every week, it really messed with my vegetable gardening in the sense that like I should have started everything at one time
Mhm.
and then had all my plants making the same transitions at the same time. Because what ended up happening was that I started some things too late and then they didn't develop properly, or they were playing catch up, or they were doing all of these things. So one of the things I would advise that I'm certainly changing for this year is do your best to try and have everything more or less on the same schedule, kind of like you would do with kids. Like you don't have one kid going to school in the morning and home in the afternoon, and the other kid vice versa, like going to school in the afternoon and home in the morning. Like kids go to school at the same time. They all, they're all more or less on the same schedule. And so you kind of want to do the same thing with your plants. Like start most of your seeds at the same. I do think that there are some that are going to be on an off schedule. Like I really like the Salanova lettuce. I don't know if you like that one, but lettuces in general have to be started a little bit later unless
Mhm.
you're going with Asian varieties. So there are some lettuces that I'm like, I like this and I'm gonna put extra effort into it. So like you can go ahead and start those a little bit later. But like I was saying, a majority of the seeds should be started at the same time, and you should do your best, or I will be doing my best this year to have everything on a schedule so that things are getting moved out little by little. And that way, when you do have to start rotating crops, so like when you do your beets, your radishes, all that kind of thing, that you just kind of take them out of the ground. You don't divide and separate and leave one going. Like when your beet is ready, you take it out of the ground, there's nothing left. But then you can have that going earlier, which means you have more harvest. So I'll be making that edit this year.
Yeah, definitely. That's a huge thing when it comes to time framing. Many people think, "Oh, I'm in November. I'm gonna go ahead and start my seeds now." That's too late because then you won't have any. You won't give the time of the vegetable to grow properly. Especially in my given circumstance, brassicas require time because brassicas are a one-time vegetable, like cauliflower,
Mm-hmm.
broccoli,
Right.
cabbage. Those are all one-time vegetables. They all produce one vegetable and then they're out for the season. However, they take their sweet time.
Yeah.
Usually, it takes them a few months until harvest date. And like I'm known for my prolific cabbages because I love growing cabbages, and my neighbor loves eating them. I usually get these huge cabbage that I've never seen grown before. I
That's
never
awesome.
have no issues growing them. Like I don't have no pests or diseases that attack them. I have to time them in time. I have to do them as early as I can. So if I want to at least start some and have a continuous harvest in a later time, that I could do so because brassicas require their sweet time in order for
Yeah,
them to properly develop in December, January when we usually are harvesting.
absolutely. Okay, so I think this will be more or less my last question. When it comes to watering, what kind of schedule do you like to stick to?
I stick to the Florida schedule. So
Okay.
I kind of like set off, although I do have a retractable hose and I do use it here and there whenever it's needed. Usually, whenever it's needed is usually during like this right now when it's our hottest temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually our plants require more water. Because even the more mature plants I have, they tend to wilt because of so
Yeah.
much heat that we have. It
Yeah.
tends to dry out the ground very easily.
Mm-hmm.
However, whenever we're in hurricane season or rainy season, I kind of set back on the watering because we get water
Absolutely.
5 times a day.
Yeah.
Not exaggerating. Like what? Probably today is gonna rain. Not gonna lie. We had a whole bunch of rain yesterday, so the garden is flourishing with natural rain. But usually, when it's in the summer, I usually have to water a little bit more than regular, as well as whenever it's in the winter when there's no watering, I have to water again. Because surprisingly, last year we experienced some very low temperatures that I've never
Yeah.
experienced before. We dropped down very low, and some of my plants got shell shocked because of it, because they're not used to that. They're used to like 50s. Like once we hear 50s on the thing, we're like dying. We're like,
Yeah.
that's too much. But
Yeah.
I believe last year we got down even to like a 40 something. It was outrageous here. And I had to go through and water, because some people are like, don't water your plants because then you'll freeze them. If not, I have to do the opposite. I have to water
Yeah.
and make sure I saturate the root system so that
Yeah.
they don't freeze off at midnight, because
Mm-hmm.
usually that's at nighttime is usually when most of our cold temperatures hit. So I usually go by Florida schedule. Whenever I see a plant wilting, I water. I give it its supplemental water. But if it doesn't require it, I'm not watering until.
I do think there's a slight difference because would you differentiate between your food forestry and your raised beds? Would you do it differently for your raised beds?
So to be honest, I kind of stick them all to the same schedule, because food
Okay.
forestry is more lenient. Once your
Yeah.
food forest is more established, you just say heck with it and you
Yep.
just leave it go. You let it do its own thing. But vegetable
Absolutely.
gardening is a little bit more babying. However, once it start like in the beginning stages, yeah, you do have to require watering. I do watering at least twice or three times a week when it comes to the beginning stages, like of your seedlings popping up
Mm-hmm.
and everything. But once they're growing and they're getting used to it, I kind of just let them go. I kind
I
of let them
agree.
do their thing.
I I kind of wish I was better at it. There are a lot of times that I do see that like I think my raised beds could use a little bit more babying than I give them. So what I started doing last year was before I would kind of just you put them in the soil, you water them, you let them do their thing. Now I do go through the extra effort of covering the raised beds with a little bit of hay, just to keep the water in, so that when you do water, it doesn't evaporate quite as quickly. Like if you leave the soil uncovered, the water does evaporate. So now I go through this. It's really not that much more effort. You just go buy a bale of hay and cover it. um but I do that now to make sure that when I water the veggies, that they do kind of get all of the benefits of that, and that the water sticks around for as long as possible. Because I'm largely on the same calendar you are. I'm just kind of like, Florida will take care of it. Like once you get them started, they'll be okay. Um, but there are times that I look and I'm like, that plant is wilting. And if I don't go out there and do something, all the effort I've put into it is going to go to waste.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'm like, I should have babied this a little bit more. But I'm largely on the same schedule you are. I do have like irrigation set up that I do have to go outside. I just turn on the hose. Like I have it all set up so that once I turn on the hose, it irrigates all three beds, and it makes it very easy. So before, what I used to do was I used to stand out there with a hose, and then I realized, I was like, I'm spending so much time watering these plants that all my time is going towards like literally just watering. And I was like, there are so many automated systems that I don't have to be doing this. And I could be so much more efficient if I just automated this. So if you are into gardening, I would recommend automating your watering to the extent that you can. Um, with that said, I think one of the more sustainable ways of doing it, which Emmanuel has been advocating for, which is just letting Florida take care of it, is also you can collect rainwater,
Mhm.
which is something that I do a lot. Like, and I just have buckets out. I have buckets out, and unless you see something weird, sometimes like tadpoles get it in or something, but unless you see something weird, like the water is absolute. Like I use it to help with the garden. And that's been one of the sustainable ways that I maintain my garden and maintain my sanity, to just kind of keep things going. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, I definitely recommend collecting rainwater, because rainwater is the best water for gardens,
Hmm.
especially since in rainwater, natural rainwater, it carries levels of nitrogen in the water. And that's why when you go out after a rain, everything looks so vibrant and so green. Because once they drink up the water with a little bit of supplemental nitrogen in it, it will become more vibrant and more flourishing. That's why rainwater is always recommended for the garden, not what
Absolutely.
your supply city water that your city
Yeah.
provides. That's why it comes to rainwater is the best way to water your
And
garden.
like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated. Like you can just
Exactly.
put out a bucket when it's raining and then use that for the next week. Like it just really doesn't have to be excessively complicated. Um, and we're talking about vegetable gardening now, but you could do that with your ornamentals. I
Yes.
mean, because right now we are in rainy season. If you're like, oh, I haven't really gone through the effort, or like vegetable gardening sounds so hard and so, like demanding, that's fine. Put a bucket out. And when it comes to your favorite flower, just use that to water your favorite flower. And you're doing the best you can for your plant. You're being sustainable. Like it's just really helpful.
Agree.
Yeah. Okay, so Emmanuel, are there any last minute tips that you'd like to leave us with in terms of fall vegetable gardening?
Yeah, I probably would just say have fun with it, to be honest with you, because it's not about, oh, I'm fighting to be the best gardener out there, because there's no amazing gardener out there. Yeah, there's gardeners out there with high levels of experience
Yeah,
and they help others grow and everything like that. Yeah, there are. But every gardener in their gardening journey has killed thousands of plants. The more plants you kill, the better gardener you become. And so
yeah,
it's a huge thing of a process of learning and doing. When it comes to gardening, if a plant dies, don't get discouraged. Try it again. Now, if making sure that it's able to grow in your area first off, because here in
yes.
South Florida, I can't say, oh, let me go ahead and bring a hydrangea and plant it in here because it'll die. It'll die. You can't
And then
bring
you'll
that,
get sad.
and then you'll get sad that it
Yeah,
anything you want to grow here with is like your hibiscus, your birds of
yeah,
paradise, your shampoo gingers, your regular
yep.
gingers. That's what you want to grow down here, and that's what you'll see the best success from. Doing your research, seeing what grows best in your area and in your zone, going after those plants, planting them out, making sure you're caring for them, not too excessively, but to a point where they'll be doing just fine. And you'll see a huge difference in your gardening journey. That's what I've experienced over the past few years that I've been doing it. Although I'm only 17, I've been doing this for all my life, technically speaking, and definitely I've learned some things throughout my gardening journey, and it's definitely of having patience, letting the garden do its own thing. Definitely weeding, although it's a terrible thing, but you have to do it, and making sure you stick to a strict schedule when it comes to feeding and watering if you're in that type of area. So
Yeah.
definitely have fun with it and see where the garden takes you because it's always evolving.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know you mentioned as we log off, is there anything in particular that you're working on that you want to let everybody know of so that they know what you're promoting?
Yeah, so I guess right now, what is the biggest thing I'm working in right now is my local nursery in Parkland. So that is
Mhm.
my nursery in Parkland that is dedicated to permaculture and food forestry. We dedicate ourselves to growing anything that is sustainable, edible, growing in your garden, like what is your shampoo ginger, your fruit trees, your mangoes, avocados, your Rolenias, anything in that given area you'll see in our nursery is currently becoming an automated nursery, meaning you go in there whenever you have the time to. We're open from 9 to 4 now, from Monday to Saturday. You'll be able to go in there. There'll be nobody assisting you because I'll be in school and my business partner, she has her own things running. And you'll be able to go in there, pick out your selection and pay through online or through a cash box. And so it is a huge project I'm working on right now. I know, as you mentioned before, I do have a podcast right now that has been on a pause for months. I haven't been able to start that back up again, which I am working on getting that back up again here in a little bit. I do have my own t-shirt line going out soon as well. So it's many things that I am trying to figure out how I could fit into the schedule.
That's wonderful. So let's make sure that we link everything in the description so that if anybody's interested, they can go find you. And then for Garden Glow Up, I'm actually in the process of starting a Shopify store. So if you're out there listening, we'll be focusing on um, all the stuff you need for your garden, but specifically the kinds of things that make the garden look really nice. So, planters and so on and so forth. So, that is coming soon. So, keep an eye out. Make sure to follow on Instagram and all of that. And I'll be letting you know when that's ready. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a great experience and a
Ah,
nice.
good. Okay. Well, hopefully we do this again.
Yes, yes.
All right. Bye, Emmanuel.
Bye.